Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, and I am super psyched because I have a transfer special for you all with none other than Rob Pratley, journalist, friend of the show, and just overall transfer expert. Rob, I know you're so freaking busy, so thank you so much for taking some time to join me today.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. We'll always find time.
Thank you. So let's jump right into it. I want to start off more generally. We're seeing a lot of transfer news coming up over the past couple of days, and I'm sure that we're going to see more. I like to preface this with that we're recording on Wednesday, June 2nd, because we know that transfer news can always be changing. But who's making the main decisions right now? Because we know that Poch has gotten appointed. He starts officially July 1st, but is he involved in the transfer process for some of the outgoings that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say, even though Pochettino starts on July the 1st, it's extremely naive to think that conversations aren't taking place. He's not talking to players. Players aren't, talking to him before that point. That's more of a political date, shall we say, in order to ensure that there's no legal repercussion from previous jobs. He is technically on, I believe, gardening leave at this moment in time from Paris Saint-Germain still, and so consequently, I believe that period has to end. But yeah, no, certainly there are conversations taking place. At the same time, there is also the extensive team involved of Paul Winstanley, Lawrence Stewart, Christophe Vivell, and Pochettino himself, Todd Bowley, who are all having a level of involvement in it. Although that said, I do understand Todd Bowley's involvement this summer is significantly lesser than previous years. I mean, a lot of people last summer sort of made a lot of things of him leading a lot of the negotiations, and also Ben Al-Gabali being involved in a number of them. I understand the intention is to try and shift away from that, certainly in this window and sort of forthcoming, and in order to try and limit the day-to-day involvement of Bowley.
Makes sense. And let's jump into the real stuff that everybody wants to get into. So first, we're going to focus on the outgoings. I'm going to go kind of position by position. So let's start with the goalkeeper. I know that it's been rumored that Chelsea are looking to bring in a new number one. So could we potentially see both Edouard Mendy and Kepa leave this summer?
I think certainly the club are looking to bring in a new number one. I think it will be very difficult for them to move on both goalkeepers this summer. I think more likely at this moment in time, Edouard Mendy is more likely to go. He's attracted interest from Italy. There's significant interest from AS Monaco. There's a little bit of interest from some of the Saudi cash-rich clubs, and certainly from Qatar. There's a bit of a feeling. There's also a little bit of interest from Thomas Tuchel in taking him to Germany to Bayern Munich, but I think that's unlikely to materialise due to the fact Bayern have a dearth of, they have a lot of goalkeepers at this moment in time. With Manuel Neuer's return to fitness, Jan Sommer still at the club, who was signed in January, the return of Alex Nöbel from Monaco on loan. So I think if I was to betting man, I would say I think Mendy will leave. I think Kepa's more difficult because while there is a level of interest in the player, he has significant wages, and it's not the sort of wages that a lot of clubs are going to be able to afford. While he's had an okay season, from what I understand, Pochettino does feel that there's a need to improve the goalkeeping department at the club. And there are also a number of goalkeepers in the summer that the club do feel might be available or certainly open for discussing a move. Chiefly, it's already been said Chelsea have interest in Inter Milan's Andrea Onana. Again, nothing with him will happen until after the Champions League final. Inter Milan have been very, very clear that while they're not necessarily against selling the player, it will be very much on their terms and on their price tag. I spoke to someone and they said, a very good Inter Milan source, and he said sort of 50 million, 60 million will get you a conversation, but it's not going to be cheap deals. Mike Maignan at AC Milan, he looked like he was going to be renewing his contract, but the recent scenario around Paolo Maldini and around Ricky Massara has meant that there might be an opportunity for something to be done with Maignan, but again, he's going to be expensive. AC Milan aren't in the same financial situation that they were in a few years ago, where they were sort of very cash weak. But I think Chelsea will certainly explore it. There have been a lot of conversations with AC Milan over multiple players at this moment in time. And then there's also Gargos Slonina, who I spoke to someone very close to the player this morning, and they said he wants quite a clear pathway. He either wants to, be in and around, have a legitimate shot, or go on loan, because there's no point sitting around as a backup player.
Mhm.
Other names, obviously, some of the youngsters like Jamie Cunningham, Nathan Baxter, I think it's pretty clear to say they'll move on. So I think from a goalkeeping position, Chelsea are looking to try and do something they'd ideally like to bring in a new first choice sort of name. Again, Emi Martinez has also been floated before. I would be extremely surprised if Aston Villa were willing to sell at a legitimate and sensible price. He is a very good goalkeeper. I believe he technically does qualify as homegrown due to the amount of time he spent in the country. He is also Argentinian, which means that inevitably links to Pochettino will be easy. But there's no release clause, as far as I'm aware, in his contract. He's happy at Aston Villa, to the best of my knowledge. I know his agent has spoken a little bit about in taking the next step up, but again, it requires Villa being willing to do that. And he did sign a new long-term deal, I think, just as recently as January. So I think it's unlikely that a club is going to get him on the cheap. They would have to significantly overpay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense, and especially after the World Cup and just the season that he's had with Villa, I don't really expect him to leave, and if he does, it's going to be super expensive. And I personally would love to see Chelsea just find some like hidden gems that it seems like every other club is able to find. But let's move on to the defense now. So there's a couple of names really floating through the air, but who do you think, if anybody, is leaving Chelsea in the defense? And then are we targeting any defenders? It seems like we're pretty stacked in that category.
I mean, let's go through the players. I think first and foremost are definitely staying. I think that's the easiest way to deal with it. So Reece James, definitely staying, signed a long-term contract. Wesley Fofana, long-term contract, if they say. Ben Chile signed in January, definitely staying. Ben Chilwell recently signed a new contract, definitely staying. So they are the four that you can definitively say are definitely staying. Then I think most likely to stay, Trevor Chalobah has made it very, very clear he wants to fight for his position and wants a chance, and he will only go if the club tell him he's no longer going to need these surplus requirements. There is a level of interest again from Inter Milan and from Italian clubs, but they would very much want a loan deal or a deal on their terms. Thiago Silva, similar situation. He has said, I will stay unless the club tell me I'm no longer needed. It seems unlikely that's going to happen due to the fact they're losing experience as well. Then you come on to sort of the players, I think, with larger question marks around them, where you've got people like Ian Maatsen. Maatsen wants assurances on being able to play. Burnley would like to buy the player. They have made one offer already that's been turned down. Chelsea would like more money and a buyback clause, ideally. Or alternatively, they'd like Maatsen to extend his contract and send him out on loan again. Maatsen does feel that he can compete and be ready, but he just sees there's so much competition in front of him in the fact there's Ben Chilwell, Mark Cucurella, and Lewis Hall, not to mention Zach Sturge also in the academy. And the Vincent Company has offered him a pathway, has spoken to him, and also, as you know, has used a parallel with Nathan Ake and said Ake left Chelsea at a young age, was this utility player. Now look at him, he's at Manchester City and arguably in a better position. So consequently, that has to be considered. Levi Colwill, the club really don't want to sell Levi Colwill. They've made it very clear to Brighton. Brighton will continue to bid because they feel they've got some level of assurance, obviously, from Colwill's side that there is an interest in him. Colwill wants assurances, and I think if the club give him assurances in pre-season, he won't push the move. I think Brighton are trying to strike while the iron's hot because they know the under-21 European Championships coming up soon, and Cole will be a big part of that. During that, there will be no scope, really, for transfers and sort of information. And right after that, he'll be coming back, going on holiday and then going back into pre-season. And so I think they're trying to get something done before that happens. Chelsea continue to rebuff the offers. To the best of my knowledge, the stance is still not for sale. They want to give him a new contract. So I think at this moment in time, unless Cole will ask to go, Chelsea will continue to block that deal. Mm-hmm. Kalidou Koulibaly, the club would like to move Koulibaly on if they could recoup the money for him, but he's on significant wages. A lot of Italian clubs are interested, but again, only want a loan. The wild card might be a return to Napoli because they are going to sell Kim Min-jae, but I think it's probably unlikely that they would be willing to stump up anywhere near what they got for the player. He wants to stay and prove himself, but again, I think if Pochettino says that you're not in my plans, there will be more active efforts to move on. Mark Cucurella, a difficult first year for him at Chelsea. The club aren't against moving him on if they can recoup a sensible amount of money. But again, interest in the player is scarce. There is a little bit of interest from Atletico Madrid, but again, they would primarily want a loan deal. If Bayern Munich did move on Lucas Hernandez, then maybe Thomas Tuchel would be interested in pursuing the play. He was a big proponent behind Cucurella's signing last year, and potentially might be interested in trying to make something happen, but that's sort of more semi-speculation at this moment in time. Cucurella, to the best of my knowledge, he recognises it was a poor year. He isn't necessarily against moving on, but I think he also would like to prove himself. Again, if opportunities become scarce, he may look to make the move, but Chelsea are going to have to take a big hit if they do sell this summer. Cesar Azpilicueta, obviously there was a lot made on the final day of the season of him, and a lot of people thought it was his final game. From what I understand, it's kind of a bit 50-50. If the right offer comes in, Chelsea aren't against moving him on, but at the same time, there's nothing actively in the pipeline. Pochettino is losing a lot of other experienced players and may want to keep him around for the leadership. At the same time, Azpilicueta may not necessarily want that role. He may want a more active role of playing and may look to go elsewhere. There is still some interest in Spain. Certainly, there's always been very, very long-term interest in Athletic Bilbao bringing him in. So possibly one to watch maybe a little bit later in the window. Other defenders.
That's it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I also can add Malo Gusto is coming into the squad, so that is one to obviously be aware of. And Lewis Hall, again, at this moment in time, Chelsea aren't looking to loan or to sell Lewis Hall. There's talk of a long-term contract again. If he asked to go on loan, maybe they would consider it, but I think the club very much want to try and get him tied down. And from what I understand, certainly internally, he's impressed a lot of people. Pochettino is known to like to work with young players, and I think it's he's the sort of player Hall will benefit from.
Yeah, it's super interesting because it feels like a lot of the players that are maybe on the brink, or at least from my opinion, are players that we actually signed last summer. But let's move on to the midfield, and we'll go through all of the players. We'll save Mason for last, since he's maybe the one that has like the most saga and might be the most interesting, and certainly the one that like breaks my heart the most. So obviously the news just broke as well that N'Golo Kante is moving on. That was a shock for me. So I guess let's start with him, Rob. Like, did you see that coming? Because the last that I heard, he was super close to signing an extension with Chelsea, and then it seems like from one day to the next, he's just signed this massive deal.
Yeah, he was close. There was certainly discussion, and there certainly was an element of being close to it. However, I think the fact is that Kante in the last 12 months at least has never really been fully fit. Although he's a phenomenal player when fully fit, increasingly there are concerns about his fitness. I did speak to someone who I trust their opinion very well on judging players, and they sort of said with Kante, because he came through sort of the less traditional route, he didn't have the academy conditioning that a lot of young players have had. Coming back from injuries as you get older and older is getting harder and harder. And you see that a little bit at Leicester with Jamie Vardy. Vardy had a significant knee injury and has lost a large swathe of his pace, no longer looks anywhere near the player that he is. And I think Chelsea maybe have made the decision that they needed to rebuild the midfield. There is a lot of midfield turnover going on. It is better to do it all at once than to sort of stagger it. Now, time will tell if this is proven to be right, but also consequently, I think you have to be sort of being fair about it, accept that Kante has not been, a present member really for Chelsea since January. Not taking away from the fact that he's a phenomenal footballer, one of the true modern Chelsea greats. He is, again, when he officially sort of leaves, I think then the right tributes we wrote. He's a Chelsea legend. He is a general footballing legend. He's incredibly, likable. And for the sums that are being discussed, I could understand it from both sides. Like Chelsea were never going to match that contract. The player himself is going to be, have his head turned by that amount of money. I can totally understand it. And I think, to be honest, I personally think it's the right time. I think giving Kante another contract would potentially have been a big drain on resources. It was going to have to be a significant wage one. He was never going to take a pay-as-you-play deal in England due to the nature of how the Premier League sort of works. And yeah, I just think it is the right time sort of for it. So I think, Kante obviously is going. Mateo Kovacic will leave. He's decided he wants to have a new path. Again, there was some interest in Tuchel in taking him to Bayern Munich, but I think probably that's cooled a little bit. Manchester City at this moment in time are best placed to sign the player. He doesn't want to sign an extension at Chelsea. Chelsea haven't really been too open sort of to long-term extensions in this regard. other midfield names to be aware of. Ruben Loftus-Cheek has been in extensive discussion with AC Milan due to the nature of how the situation at AC Milan has changed. Other Italian clubs such as Lazio are keeping interest in it. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at Lazio, in all honesty, because Maurizio Sarri being there, Sarri really likes the player. Loftus-Cheek does like Maurizio Sarri. Certainly, I think Chelsea are happy to get rid, and they're no longer counting on the player. They are also conscious that they've got a number of young players that they can sort of bring into the midfield rotation. Conor Gallagher, the club aren't actively looking to move him on. I think if a bid came in that was above a certain value, then they would consider accepting it. But I think Gallagher himself will reject it. He wants to prove himself at Chelsea. He is happy and settled, and I think at this moment in time, he's the sort of player I'm told is really looking forward to working with Pochettino and seeing, what the future holds. I don't think this summer he's likely to move on due to the amount of a turnover. When Timu Bakayoko will have his contract cancelled. I'm surprised that happened already. There's been a lot of discussion on it.
He's still.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. But it's finally that charade should hopefully end, and realistically, he needs to be able to move on away from the shackles of being constantly loaned out, so he can actually get on with his career. And because footballing careers are finite, and he's gone from being a young prospect to sort of having very little prospect whatsoever. And he deserves the right to, as much as anyone, to be able to go away and rebuild his career. Other midfielders to be aware of. Again, Chukwuemeka, the sort of ball is a little bit up in the air on him. He, I think, will go on loan next season. I would be less surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to see Casadei come into the squad because of his under-20s performance and the fact he offers something a little bit different to some of the other players. And Chukwuemeka go on loan for the year. Carly Chukwuemeka is desperate to make it at Chelsea. He's desperate to really impress. He wanted to play more. He was really disappointed, actually, to not play more in the second half of the season for whatever reason. But I think, if they get the right loan offer for him, it could be a really good thing for him. Obviously, there are less games, actually, due to less competitions that Chelsea are involved in. So they need to make a decision on that. Andre Santos is another one where I think Pochettino will take some time and review in pre-season. Some people think a European loan might be best for him. I'll be honest, I haven't watched a lot of the player. What I have watched, I have been very impressed by the player. But again, I think Pochettino would like to assess him properly in pre-season. And I'd say that with Chukwuemeka, Casadei, and Andre, I suspect one of them will join the squad, but I think the other two will probably end up out on loan. But again, who it ends up being will be sort of decided by Pochettino in sort of pre-season. Mount, obviously, we're sort of going to come on and discuss separately.
So let's dive into Mason. I think we've covered some of the midfielders, and my heart is literally beating, Rob. Like, I have just a sinking feeling in my stomach. I hate the Mason Mount saga so much, and you know me, like, I'm just one of his biggest fans. I just think he's amazing, and it just breaks my heart how this situation has been handled. But of course, I don't have the details. So could you maybe fill us in about, there's been a lot of PR from both Chelsea and potentially from Mason's side, but do you have any idea about like what a realistic middle ground, what the real story is? What are the chances that he stays? He's obviously been linked heavily with Man United, that entire saga, and I'll try not to burst into tears.
So I'll start off at and initially, and this is where partly one of the biggest faults will come, after Chelsea won the Champions League, they should have sat down immediately with Mason Mount and renewed his contract at that point. The old regime didn't. They were more focused that summer on sorting out the signing of Romelu Lukaku and also some other more spurious transfer activity. Then it came to January before the sanctions hit, and there was initial discussions extending it, and they said, let's wait till the end of the season. Then the new sanctions obviously hit, and we had a new ownership change, and the new owners came in. The new owners wanted to sit down and talk to Mason Mount last summer. Mason's representative said, fine, let's sit down and make an offer. So there were initial discussions last summer. This is around the time Reece James is signing his 6-year deal. So initial discussions happened then. Subsequently, there are further discussions before the World Cup, and before the World Cup, from what I understand, there was always the deal pretty much signed and rubber stamped. Now, it required a few little bits and pieces to be done, and it became very, very clear that this couldn't be done before Qatar because Southgate had a no contracts, no shot policy, no talking shot policy while you're at Qatar, and so as a result of that, the deal stunted. At this point in time, Chelsea changed their structure and changed who were dealing with contracts. various people took on different roles. And so when they came back after Qatar, someone else was involved in the negotiation. And suddenly the offer from before before was off the table. Now, discussions have taken place between all parties where terms have been suggested that aren't suitable from Chelsea's point of view. They've suggested terms that aren't suitable from Mount's point of view. Mount has obviously changed representation now. From what I understand, more due to the fact that people wanted to, sort of people from the Mount camp tell me that they wanted to try and make it as clean as possible and easy as possible. People from Chelsea's camp saying to me that this was at the point they felt Mason wanted to move on. The last offer, to my knowledge, was a 12-month extension with a very lucrative salary included onto it, but certainly people from Mount's side felt that was just an attempt to profiteer and try and boost a transfer fee for the summer. So we've come to this situation. Pochettino would like to keep the player, but he recognises that if the player's mind is made up that he wants to go, then he isn't going to change it. Now, from what I understand, people do feel Mount's mind is made up. They feel he's decided he wants to leave the club for whatever reason. Certainly internally for people at the club, they are also pointing to the fact that he's struggled over the last 18 months, both with fitness and with form, and that they consequently feel that, perhaps it's a case of too much too soon. The player in question has attracted a lot of interest from around Europe, but again, a lot of them are very reluctant to meet Chelsea's price tag, which is around 70 million. Discussions have taken place with Manchester United. There's no point in hiding it. And I understand that broad agreements on personal terms have been reached with Manchester United, albeit maybe verbally. Now, Chelsea want a flat fee. They want 70 million, or they will just say no deal. They aren't necessarily against keeping Mason Mount if no one matches the valuation. However, then they do risk the fact that they will lose him on a free transfer unless they significantly change the wage offer, which, might happen if Pochettino sort of sees him as a key player, builds around him, etc. However, I think at this moment in time it's an 80-20 sort of chance in favour of Mount leaving, and I think it will be to Manchester United. I think they will match the asking price. Eric Ten Hag has wanted him for a long time. He tried to buy him at Ajax from when he was on loan at Vitesse. Ironically, Chelsea actually turned down a very, very convoluted swap deal that involved Frankie de Jong back in his Ajax days for Mason Mount and some other players. It was an extremely convoluted deal at the time. But it's I think a good lesson for a lot of parties. Chelsea need to sort out the contract situation, have the people that are managing it. If they're making verbal offers to players, then they need to be sticking and putting those offers down in writing and not changing the buck. I've heard this happen a few times now, and it seems to be a case that certain people are behaving in a way where they think they can save more money when it actually comes down to the paper offer. At the same time, I do also understand that Chelsea have made what they feel is good offers to the player, and they feel that, at this moment in time, they don't necessarily warrant further offers. Someone else did also say to me that a lot of Chelsea's transfer business at this moment in time and offers they're making to players, they are offering wages with significant caveats, and if they get back into the Champions League, they can then see significant increases on the wages. But at this moment in time, they do recognise that may not suit every player. And for someone like Mason Mount, for example, who's maybe seen Reece James and Raheem Sterling get significant sort of contracts as similar England internationals, he wants something similar, which maybe is not on the table. So I think at this moment in time, he's like to leave. I still wouldn't completely rule out, a twist happening. I think it's the sort of saga that's gone on for so long. But I honestly, from my personal opinion, I think it needs to come to an end one way or another sooner rather than later. Because the more and more it drags on, the more and more it just becomes a necessary sideshow for Pochettino.
Yeah, of course. It just makes me so upset because he's Chelsea's player of the season for 2 years in a row. Nobody's had a good season. So I don't know. I could go on and on about this, but it's the entire team has had a poor season. So you can't put that against Mason. You can't.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, as I said to someone the other day and sort of trying to play devil's advocate on this, Chelsea had a similar situation with Juan Mata, where Mata was player of 2 years in a row and people couldn't contemplate selling him. Mourinho obviously came in and didn't feature him in his plans, and he was sold, 6 months later to Manchester United. And then he never really recovered the same form or quality. Now, it is possible that Mount may be in the exact same situation. It may be the case that Chelsea have seen his peak at the very beginning, and he's peaked very, very early. We have seen other young English players come in, do that, and peak, and it's too much too soon. Only time will sort of tell. But I do think increasingly there is a sort of feeling internally that if players aren't willing to be committed, they need to be moved on sooner rather than being allowed to sort of stay around or maybe being sent out on loan, etc. As has happened in the past, there needs to be more of a focus on trying to get money in and getting cash in quicker.
Yeah, but I don't know, right? But it just seems like, well, that's easy profit for Chelsea because he's an academy player. It's going to be profit on the books. And I don't know, like I don't know salary structure. I only know that I can look on this site and see like approx how much they're making, but that could be different based off of like different appearance numbers or like Champions League appearance, whatever it is.
Yes.
But I see, you know, like you have Kepa on 150K and Kukore or whatever. And I don't know how accurate that actually is, but Mason on 80K supposedly, like I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
I'm super biased, so I can admit that I'm biased towards Mason.
I do understand that. I mean, I will also say to people that like don't a lot of the reporting about finances and around salaries.
Yeah,
I would take it with a pinch of salt.
exactly. So that's why I try to like, you know, put it into perspective. I'm like, okay, this probably isn't so correct. We don't have the exact numbers, whatever. But the whole situation just like gets me so upset. But
Yes,
that's because I'm a massive Mason Mount fan, and I don't think that he's peaked early. I don't. I think that it's going to be a great signing for United, but let's see. Like you said, time will tell, and maybe he'll stay. We never know. But until so that I don't keep rambling about Mason, let's move on to the attack. And this is where I think we could also see quite a bit of movement as well. So who do you see as maybe being the main people to leave Chelsea this summer in the attack?
So I think let's go for the players that are going to leave. Pulisic will go. Aubameyang is going to go.
Where will Pulisic go to? Do you know?
I would imagine. At this moment in time, I imagine Juventus, but there's a little bit of interest in him from all over Europe. Dortmund wouldn't be against taking him back on a cheap deal. It wouldn't shock me if Bayern Munich, if he was cheap, threw their hat into the ring with the attackers that they're changing, because Tuchel does really like the player. There's a lot, there's a fair amount of interest in it, but again, it's solidifying that. And people are also wary with Pulisic that his injury record is not outstanding, shall we say. They're also conscious that his contract, I think, expires next summer. And so they won't necessarily want to just make huge offers where they can get on a free transfer. Next year, there's no chance he's going to renew at Chelsea because he's not happy. What I will say with that, and then again, Aubameyang was just a terrible piece of business, ridiculous bit of business by Chelsea. Never should have done it. I said it at the time last year. And, they will likely have to take a huge hit on him. They may end up rescinding his contract. I think Chelsea are hoping that someone from Saudi Arabia makes a big offer wage-wise for him, and then they can just let him go on a free transfer and someone matches his ridiculous wages that Chelsea are paying him. Deep breath.
So, what's coming?
I'm just giving myself a deep breath for just take a moment myself to breathe.
Take all the time you need, Rob. You've been talking straight for 30 minutes, so.
Ziyech, the club are happy to move him on. The PSG deal in January went disastrous. They may return with a level of interest, although Chelsea and PSG aren't getting on very well at this moment in time, as is well documented. He wants to leave. Absolute wild card. Maybe Erik ten Hag will look to take him to Manchester United on loan if they were to move players on. I think it's very, very unlikely, but I sort of wouldn't rule it out. There's interest in Italy from AC Milan, who lost Brahim Diaz back to Real Madrid. Again, they'd want a loan deal. He's on significant wages. Chelsea wouldn't be against, I think, loaning him out for a year before trying to sell next summer. Hudson-Odoi, career at a crossroads, needs to move on to get regular minutes somewhere. Nottingham Forest are very keen. It could be a real bargain for Steve Cooper. There is a level of interest from Crystal Palace. Again, Pochettino wants to talk to the player, but I think it's unlikely he will remain at Chelsea. Sterling wants to stay, and he wants to try and show he is worth it and can improve. Mudryk and Madueke, there's no chance of either of them leaving unless something extremely, extremely, extremely unprecedented, dramatic happens, which is Chelsea, so I'll never rule it out. Then it comes on to Kai Havertz. There is interest from Real Madrid, but not at the price Chelsea won. There is interest from Bayern Munich, but not at the price Chelsea won. There is a level of interest from Barcelona, but not at the price Chelsea want. I think this one will rumble on. Havertz has made it clear he'd like to try something different and he'd like the club to cooperate. It's possible this one might rumble on all summer. Pochettino isn't against keeping the player, but he's also not against him moving on if they can get the right fee for him. Chelsea do recognise ultimately that they haven't got the same product out of Havertz, and they do feel that maybe now is the time to sell. His contract's in 2025, so realistically, this summer is the year you can really get big money for the player before it gets into sort of the final 12 months. So I think that's certainly one to watch. I think at this moment in time, he's less likely to leave than some of the names, but I think it's not worth throwing it out. Broja, there's interest in a loan, but he wants to see how he does in pre-season. Pochettino is very keen to work with the player, and he's keen to get back fit. And Datra Fofana, again, the club are looking at a sensible loan for the player. I think Pochettino will want to assess him in pre-season and work out, what the next steps are. Amari Hutchinson, again, he wants a loan. I think there's quite a few clubs in the Championship interested in bringing him in. He nearly went on loan in January to West Brom. Again, they might renew interest. There's a lot of Championship interest in the player. I'm trying to think.
Mm-hmm. I always forget about him. Lukaku.
Nothing will happen before the Champions League final. Unsurprisingly, his focus is all on that. Inter Milan want another loan deal. They want a cheaper loan deal, and they want Chelsea to take on more of the wages. Pochettino, I think, will want to talk to the player in pre-season and see exactly what he wants. Lukaku wants to stay in Italy. The absolute ideal outcome Chelsea can have here is either they can force him into some sort of deal for an Inter Milan player, force him into some sort of deal for an AC Milan player, or alternatively get him to Juventus if they lose Dusan Vlahovic. I can't see any scenario where Chelsea don't take a massive hit on Lukaku. I think they've accepted that because it was the old ownership that did it. I think the new ownership have just accepted it's probably going to go down as a bad debt.
Interesting. And I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. I think that's basically it. But let's go quickly into incomings because I know you have to hop. So you spoke briefly already about the goalkeeper, but I think, at least from my point of view, the main positions that we've seen is maybe like a defensive midfielder and a striker. One, do you agree with that? And two, who's been linked?
Yeah, so Chelsea ideally would like to bring in two midfielders and a striker in this window, and then bring in one of the youngsters in rotation. There is real interest in Moise Caicedo of Brighton. Caicedo believes he has some sort of agreement with Brighton. I've heard rumours of various clauses and various things. If X is bid, then they have to let him go. I don't know how legitimate any of this is. Brighton will inevitably ask for Levi Colwill in exchange. I personally would step away from this deal because I think Brighton are either going to fleece Chelsea or only accept a deal involving Levi Colwill. I think Caicedo is a very good player, but I think there's opportunities elsewhere in the market. Declan Rice, I think the ship has sailed. Chelsea do still have significant interest in the player, but he wants European football. Arsenal are very interested. Bayern Munich are interested. Manchester United are increasingly growing their interest in the fact that they're bringing in Mason Mount may also swing it their way. The wild card would be Manchester City. Romeo Lavia, there's been long-term interest in Chelsea. Chelsea tried to sign him as a youngster, and now with Joe Shields at the club, there's even more interest in the player. I think that Southampton will want a lot of money for him because even though they've been relegated because they recognise the potential, they are aware that Manchester City do have a buyback clause next summer, and that Manchester City will likely trigger that regardless of what situation they're in, even if they bring him into profiteer next year. I think Chelsea will solidify their interest in Lavia and make a move. There is interest from Liverpool as well in the player, so it's potentially one they're going to fight over. Kefren Turam's another one where he was offered by his agent to PSG, who've instead opted for Manuel Ugarte, as we know. There is interest from Liverpool in the player. Newcastle have spoken to his agent. His agent more recently has offered him to Chelsea, so it'll be interesting to see if Chelsea do solidify interest in him. I think he'd be a very, very good signing. Manu Kone, his agent told Chelsea that his primary choice was moving to Chelsea. Gladbach want a lot of money for the player. Liverpool recently have solidified interest. I think the lack of European football will also perhaps play against Chelsea. Bayern Munich would like to take the player in his cover, but again, he wants assurances on his minutes. There is longer-term interest from a number of other clubs as well. It wouldn't surprise me to see bids being made for Manu Kone. Gabby Vega, there is a level of interest there as a Mason Mount replacement, but I think it's been overblown in the last 24 hours. There is a release clause, so naturally everyone's getting very, very excited about it. But I wouldn't sort of necessarily pay a lot of attention into it. Some more wild card names at this moment in time that may or may not become important. There's long-term interest in the club at Sergej Milinkovic-Savic at Lazio. Again, if Lazio do move for Ruben Loftus-Cheek, something can maybe be done. Milinkovic-Savic would like to leave. Frank Kessié, he is available for Barcelona at a sensible price. Pochettino was previously interested in bringing him to Paris Saint-Germain, so maybe we'll look to make something happen with him. There is a bit of interest in, and again, I say a little bit of interest because it's hard to know exactly how to gauge it. There are a little bit of interest in Marco Verratti at PSG. Again, he was a key player for Pochettino. PSG aren't against selling the player now due to some other off-the-field issues that have happened. Chelsea would like to bring Fede Valverde in, but I can't imagine that Real Madrid are going to entertain any bids for the player. The wild card might be Tchouaméni on loan if Real Madrid are willing to let him go. But again, I think Chelsea are unlikely to want to bring a player in on loan without an option to retain the services. They would look to maybe something similar to Kovacic. But again, I think that would be much later in the window. The fact that Bellingham has joined, they've got Camavinga and they've got Fede there, will mean that between Camavinga and Tchouaméni, they want, and also Modric renewing his contract, will mean that they will want to try and ensure Tchouaméni has a pathway, which may not necessarily be easy to do. There's long-term club interest in Nicola Barella at Inter Milan, but I think that will probably go nowhere. He's very, very settled in Italy, and it would take a lot of money to bring him away. And that's really about it. I mean, there are some other names. Youssouf Fofana at Monaco as well is a name to watch, possibly, and Chelsea have some initial conversations with Monaco over a few things. As for strikers, the main name is Victor Osimhen, but he's going to be horrendously expensive, and I think Napoli are going to want to profiteer on that deal. There is interest from Chelsea. There's interest from Manchester United. Real Madrid may now throw their hat in the ring with Karim Benzema going. He will be horrendously expensive. Paris Saint-Germain hold long-term interest. Jonathan David at Lille. The club held interest before he moved to Lille. I think they will consider exploring it again. He may be more cheaper, although there is a feeling he's a bit similar to Christoph Nkunku in the style of play, who is also obviously coming into Chelsea, which is something that a lot of people are, I think, forgetting when they're doing some of their plans. Ivan Toney, there's longer-term interest in the club in there, but nothing will happen this window due to the ban. Alexander Mitrovic, someone has said to me that, I have no reason to doubt, that he would like to move to Chelsea. I find it very, very hard to imagine that Fulham would accept any offers from Chelsea due to the rivalry between the two clubs. Yeah. Dusan Vlahovic, his agent, has made it clear to a number of European clubs he is available. I think it's unlikely that Chelsea will end up being his destination unless they pay significantly over the odds. I don't think paying significantly over the odds is a good plan for him at this moment in time.
There's so many names in the striker department. I don't know.
There are a lot of names, and I think over the next couple of weeks it will start to become very clear, and one will solidify as the key option. But I think until that happens at this moment in time, Pochettino will want to sit down with the existing strikers at the club and sit down and see what they have to say about it. And yeah, they will make a decision from there.
Cool. And just to wrap things up, because I know that you have to go, you've given me so much time already. Just in one or two sentences, what do you think is key for Chelsea in order to consider having a successful transfer window?
The main thing is to get players out. They need to sort the squad out. They need to minimise the number of players in the squad. There needs to be at least 10 plus departures of players. It needs to be streamlined because the squad that Graham Potter and Frank Lampard at times have been dealing with has just been ridiculous. It's been far too big. And it's also sorting out the midfielders, getting the quality in the midfield, and also balancing the defence, I think, are the key things for me. I think once you do those, you will sort yourself out a lot more from the back. I think a goalkeeper is important in that as well. So if I was honest, I'd say the defence midfielder and the goalkeeper to me are the priorities over the striker. I think Nkunku can play up there. I think you can also, Broja will have a good season if he'd stay fit, but taking the pressure off that defence and actually bringing the balance to the midfield so that you can then sustain attacks will make it a lot easier for a striker to do well.
Yeah. Well said, Rob. Well, thank you so freaking much for coming on the channel, and let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at RJP Journalism for my work, and also follow at FBall on Twitter for my women's football work, because there's a lot of women's transfers going on at the moment.
Yes, Chelsea are getting their business done early.
Chelsea women know what they're doing in the transfer market. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. So thank you, Rob, so much, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did. Super, super insightful, and basically all that you need to know about Chelsea transfers as of June 7th. So hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to follow Rob on socials. I'll put everything in the description box down below. And while you're at it, give me a follow as well and sub to the channel because I have lots more content coming this summer. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, evening, whatever time you're watching this. And until next time, I'm out. Bye.